The hush hit the courtroom like a sudden squall the instant I crossed the threshold. My father let out a low, incredulous snort. My mother pressed 2 fingers to her lips, as if to trap whatever sharp remark hovered there. The judge, silver-haired, half-moon glasses perched low, stopped mid-shuffle of his papers and stared, the gavel frozen in his grip. "Lord have mercy," he breathed, barely audible. "It's her." Every head swiveled. The silence stretched, thick as Norfolk fog. For the first time I could remember, my parents had nothing to say. 2 days earlier, I'd been on my knees in the yard, wrestling back the wild Alis vines that had tried to swallow the mailbox. The mail truck coughed to a stop. The driver handed me a single envelope, thick cream stock, embossed with the seal of Port South Family Court. Case 4238B. Carter v. Carter, Property Division. Plaintiffs, Robert and Margaret Carter. Defendant, Evelyn Carter. My own name looked foreign in black ink. I laughed once, a cracked sound that startled a mockingbird from the oak. Knox, my ancient shepherd with the gray muzzle and the hitch in his hindquarters, padded over and dropped his chin on my boot. "They ran out of words," I told him. "So now they're using lawyers." It had been 12 years since I'd loaded a sea bag and left that sagging farmhouse behind. The last image I carried of them, Dad in his grease-stained coveralls, shouting that I was throwing my life away, Mom clutching the porch rail, tears shining but never falling. I'd just pinned on my trident after surviving Bud S. Dad skipped the ceremony. Mom's text was 3 words: "We wanted daughters." I stopped asking for understanding after that. I served in the shadows, logistics officer, moving destroyers and Marines like chess pieces across glowing screens. No headlines, just quiet miracles. Fuel here, medevac there, men breathing who might not have. Then the blast outside Al Hudaida. Shrapnel rewrote my left knee. The Navy rewrote my future. I came home with a cane, a pension, and a small brick house 10 miles from the base. I rebuilt the porch with my own hands, sanded the floors until they gleamed, and never once dialed the number I still knew by heart. That night, the summons sat on my table like a live round. I brewed coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe and opened the old sea chest. Salt and gun oil rose up like a ghost. There lay the dress blues, pressed and waiting. Beside them, the triangle-folded flag from Chief Lewis's casket. I hadn't touched either since the cemetery in Arlington. My fingers found the jacket anyway. Knox watched, ears pricked. "Time they saw the whole story," I said. My voice didn't shake. Much. Next morning, I called the clerk. "They claim abandonment," she recited, bored. "House has sat empty." Empty. I'd wired the tax payment every March since Grandpa died. "I'll be there," I said. Abandonment. The word tasted like the copper tang before a firefight. I drove past the farm at dusk. The house slumped, paint curling like old fingernails. Grandpa's oak had lost half its limbs to lightning. He'd built every sill and joist after Okinawa, humming Sinatra while he worked. "Wood remembers, Evie. Treat it right. It'll hold your weight forever." He left it to me because I was the only one who listened to the stories in the grain. That night I pinned medals in the lamplight. Bronze Star, Navy Commendation, the quiet fruit of nights I still woke from sweating. The jacket settled on my shoulders like an old friend who'd never left. In the mirror I looked taller, or maybe just done shrinking. Court day broke humid and gold. I parked beneath the same diner sign where Dad once ordered me pancakes and told the waitress his son scored 3 touchdowns. Never mentioned my full-ride NROTC scholarship. The courthouse steps sweated under my polished shoes. A custodian paused his broom. "Morning, Commander?" he said, soft, almost shy. I nodded, throat tight. Inside, the hallway smelled of lemon oil and anxiety. I took the back bench, hat in my lap. Whispers followed the ribbons on my chest like gulls behind a trawler. When they called the case, I rose. The limp was there, but the cadence wasn't. Left, right, steady as a metronome. Dad had shrunk inside his suit. The shoulders still tried for authority. Mom's pearls looked too heavy for her neck. They didn't look at me until I sat. Then Mom's gaze snagged on the silver eagles, widened, slid away. Judge Simmons entered, robe rustling like sails. He knew the name before he saw the uniform. I caught the flicker. Plaintiffs claim abandonment and petition transfer of title, he began. Dad launched in. Taxes, repairs, neglect. Each word a harpoon. I waited. When the judge turned to me, the room tilted. Commander Carter, your response? The title landed between my parents like a depth charge. Dad's mouth opened, closed. I laid documents in a neat stack. Canceled checks, contractor receipts, satellite photos of the new roof I'd DSD paid for in 2018. I've covered every dime since 2013, I said. My voice carried the same calm I'd used calling an air support under fire. Abandonment requires intent. Mine was service, not absence. Dad surged up. She walked out. Mr. Carter. The gavel tapped once, sharp as a starting pistol. I continued. I re-enlisted because ships done a tea sail themselves and wars done a tea pause for family reunions. You told the town I'd thrown my life away. I just chose a different ocean. The judge removed his glasses, polished them slowly. Commander, the Yemen evacuation, 2019, that was your op? A murmur rippled. Dad frowned. What evacuation? Classified until last year, I said. We pulled 312 souls off a beach while mortars walked the dunes. Lost 2. Saved the rest. I met Mom's eyes. I sent you the unclassified summary. It came back, returned to sender. Silence pooled again, deeper this time. The judge asked a few more questions, but the fight had gone out of the room like air from a punctured lung. He reserved ruling, evidence to review, but the tilt was obvious. Outside, sunlight hit the brass on my cover like a signal flare. Dad brushed past, muttering. Mom lingered on the steps, pearls catching the light. For a second, I thought she might speak. She didn't. I walked to the truck, Knox waiting with his head out the window, tail thumping Morse code against the door panel. That night, I sat on my own porch, new boards, no sag, and unfolded Grandpa's flag across my lap. The stars were sharp against the dark. Somewhere down the road, the old house waited, bruised but still standing. I didn't need to own it to keep its stories. Some things you inherit in the blood, not on paper. Knox sighed, leaned against my good knee. I scratched his ears. We're square, old man, I told him. We showed up. That's enough. Above us, the North Star burned steady, same as it had over Pacific convoys and desert runways, and one small girl listening to her grandfather name the sky. I finally knew which way was home. The attorney for my parents rose from his seat, adjusting the knot of his glossy red tie under the fluorescent hum of the courtroom lights. Your Honor, my clients insist that Commander Carter forfeited all claim to the property more than a decade ago, leaving the full burden of upkeep and taxation to her mother and father. Judge Hargrove lifted one eyebrow. Commander Carter, you mean? The lawyer's Adam's apple bobbed. Yes, Commander Carter. She walked away and never looked back. The judge's gaze shifted to me. Your rebuttal, Commander? I flipped open the leather binder I'd carried in the day before, but today the pages were thicker, heavier. The land was willed to me by my grandfather 12 years ago, I said, voice level, the way I'd learned to speak into a radio during a sandstorm. I have paid every property tax installment since then. I pushed the stack across the polished table, county ledgers, bank routing slips, a notarized copy of the will. The lawyer craned forward. Convenient timing for these records to surface. Convenient? I echoed. They've been filed annually. Every withdrawal came from my active duty account, then from my VA disability stipend after the shrapnel in my knee ended my last tour. Judge Hargrove skimmed the documents, the crease between his brows deepening. Payments are current and traceable. He turned to my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, did you know your daughter was covering the taxes? Mom's lips parted, but nothing came. Dad's jaw flexed. If she was, she never bothered to mention it. I met his eyes. You never bothered to ask. Silence pooled in the room, thick as engine oil. The judge removed his glasses, polished them with a handkerchief. I don't usually digress in chambers, but, Commander, were you the officer on the Yemen extraction 2019? Yes, sir. He gave a slow nod. 43 civilians pulled out of a flash flood canyon. Silver Star. A rustle moved through the gallery like wind through dry grass. Dad's head snapped toward the judge. What extraction? Your daughter, the judge said, commanded a mixed Navy contractor team under fire and monsoonal runoff. She carried the last child out on her back after the rope bridge collapsed. Mom's hand slid from Dad's sleeve and hung in the air, forgotten. I kept my gaze on the bench. Judge Hargrove tapped the folder once. No abandonment. Petition denied. The gavel cracked, sharp, final, the sound of a hatch sealing behind me. Dad surged to his feet. This is... Sir, the bailiff warned. Dad's shoulders folded inward, the way a sail goes slack when the wind dies. I gathered my papers. My fingers trembled, not from nerves, but from the sudden absence of weight I'd carried across 3 continents. As I stepped into the aisle, the judge murmured, almost under his breath, "Hell of a thing seeing you standing there." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Outside, the sun struck the courthouse steps like a searchlight. A retired gunner's mate in a faded USS Nimitz cap snapped a salute. I returned it without thinking. In the parking lot, I sat behind the wheel a long minute, letting the engine idle. Knox was waiting. Old Shepherd mix, 3 legs, heart bigger than most people I'd served with. The farmhouse was waiting too, though I hadn't decided what to do with it yet. I drove to the harbor instead, the one beside the decommissioned yard where I'd shipped out on my first float. The tide was out. Barnacled pilings gleamed like ribs. I left the uniform jacket on, medals tucked inside the pocket so they wouldn't clink. I thought about the men who hadn't come back to any dock. Ortiz, who could rebuild a turbine with a Leatherman and a prayer. Harper, who kept a photo of his daughter taped inside his helmet. They'd called me Iron Eve because I never flinched when the helo took fire. They never saw me flinch later either, when the nightmares came with the smell of diesel and wet sand. I'd paid those taxes the way other people write letters they never mail. Each electronic transfer was a postcard that said, "I'm still here." Grandpa had been the only one who ever answered. He'd taught me to carve whistles from cedar on that same porch. When I left for basic, he pressed one into my hand. "Blow this when you need to remember home," he said. I lost it somewhere between Fallujah and a medevac bird. I never told him. After he died, I flew in on emergency leave, arrived after they'd lowered the casket. Mom said, "We didn't think you'd make it." Dad said nothing at all. The will came 6 weeks later, a single paragraph. To my granddaughter, Evelyn Carter, the house and 80 acres, because she knows what duty looks like when no one's watching. I kept paying the taxes from Norfolk apartments, from forward operating bases, from a VA hospital bed, while surgeons picked metal out of my femur. I never told my parents because the land wasn't leverage. It was evidence. The night after the hearing, I drove out to the farm under a half moon. The house sagged, but the porch board still remembered my weight. I found the loose plank by the steps, pried it up with my fingers. Beneath, the cedar whistle lay wrapped in oilskin, exactly where I'd hidden it the summer I turned 17. Grandpa's initials, EC, were carved beside mine. I sat on the top step until the moon climbed high enough to silver the corn stubble. Somewhere a coyote yipped, then silence. I realized I wasn't keeping the farm to spite my parents. I was keeping it because someone had to remember why the porch light used to stay on. Next morning, I returned to the courthouse with a manila envelope. The clerk, name tag said Marla, looked up, startled. Back so soon? Final addendum, I said. Inside were the current tax receipt and a one-page affidavit. I do not intend to sell. The property will be placed in a revocable trust for the local VFW post, to be used as a respite cabin for combat veterans. Effective immediately. Marla's eyes widened. You're giving it away? Not giving. Loaning, some debts you pay forward. She stamped the pages, slid them into the file. My husband did 2 tours in Helmand. He'd sleep better knowing places like this exist. Tell him the coffee's always on, I said. In the parking lot, Dad leaned against his pickup, cigarette glowing. When he saw me, he straightened like a recruit caught slouching. Guess you showed us, he said. I showed the record, I corrected. He flicked ash, studied the ember. Your grandpa said you had his mother's eyes. I always figured that was just old man talk. I waited. He exhaled smoke through his nose. He'd be proud. Doesn't mean I understand it, but he'd be proud. I nodded once, climbed into my truck. In the rear view, I watched him stand there until the dust hid him. Back at the rental, Knox met me at the door, tail thumping Morse code against my shin. I poured coffee, left it black, and opened the laptop. The VA had forwarded an email, new program, peer counseling for female vets transitioning out. They needed facilitators. I typed a reply before I could talk myself out of it. That night, I hung the uniform in the closet, medals facing the wall. I took the cedar whistle from my pocket, set it on the kitchen table where the morning light would find it. Then I opened the back door and let the salt wind roll in. For the first time since I'd learned to stand at attention, I didn't have a mission brief. Just the sound of Knox dreaming, paws twitching after rabbits that only existed behind his eyelids, and the quiet knowledge that tomorrow I'd drive out to the farm with a toolbox and a thermos. Some victories don't end with a gavel. They start with a hammer and a promise to keep the light on for whoever needs it next. The dust still clung to my boots when I stepped off the gravel and onto the cracked concrete of the old barn lot. Dad was there, cigarette pinched between 2 fingers, the smoke curling up past the brim of his feed store cap. He didn't look at me right away. When he did, the corners of his mouth twitched like he was chewing on words he couldn't spit out. You made a spectacle, he said at last. I made a choice, I answered. My voice didn't shake. 12 years in the teams had burned that out of me. He flicked ash onto the ground. Your mother cried in the grocery store. People stared. She cried because she finally saw me. I shrugged. Better late than never. His eyes narrowed, the same storm gray I used to fear when I was 10. I don't recognize the girl in that uniform. Good, I said, because she's not a girl anymore. That night I stayed at Grandpa's place, my place now, hammering loose boards back into the corral fence. The rhythm of nail against wood steadied my pulse. Headlights cut across the field. Mom's sedan rolled to a stop, engine ticking as it cooled. She climbed out, clutching a small silver frame, the one that used to sit on Grandpa's dresser. I wasn't snooping, she said before I could ask. I was looking for his war medals to polish for the VFW dinner. She handed me the photograph. Grandpa in dress whites, one arm slung around a gap-toothed kid with crooked pigtails. Me. I traced the glass with a thumb calloused from pull-ups and rifle grips. He kept this? I asked. Face out. Always. She swallowed. He bragged about you to anyone who'd listen. Said his granddaughter could outswim, outshoot, and outcuss half the boys in the county. I laughed once, sharp. He never told me that. You were gone. Her voice cracked on the last word. We thought the Navy took you. Turns out we pushed. I studied her face in the porch light. New lines around the eyes, the same stubborn chin. I'm here now. She nodded, then left without another word. The taillights disappeared down the washboard road, red eyes blinking into darkness. Days bled into weeks. I patched roofs, scraped rust, coaxed the well pump back to life. Every splinter I pulled free felt like yanking shrapnel from an old wound. Knox, 3 legs, 1 heart bigger than most men, limped after me, tongue lolling approval. One dusk, Dad's pickup rattled in. He killed the engine but stayed behind the wheel a full minute, knuckles white. When he finally stepped out, he carried a paper sack from the hardware store. "Saw the swing was sagging," he muttered. "Brought chain." We worked side by side without speaking. The only sounds: metal links clinking, cicadas, the creak of new weight on old wood. When we finished, he tested it with 1 boot. Satisfied, he nodded once. "Grandpa sat right here the night before he shipped out in 44, he said. "Told me, son, courage ain't the absence of fear. It's deciding something else matters more." I waited. "I was scared you'd die over there," he continued, voice rough as creek gravel. "Turned out I was more scared you'd live and never come back." Silence pooled between us, thick but not hostile. "Sunday supper," he said suddenly. 6 sharp. Don't make your mother set an extra plate for nothing." He left before I could answer. Sunday arrived wrapped in low clouds and the smell of coming rain. I wore khakis, sleeves rolled once, dog tags tucked beneath the collar. No ribbons, no trident, just me. The house looked smaller than memory, or maybe I'd grown into the space it used to swallow. Mom opened the door mid-knock, apron dusted with flour. "You're early." Old habit. Punctuality saves lives. Dad was in the kitchen, carving roast the way he used to carve Thanksgiving turkey. Precise. Reverent. He glanced up. "Legs still bark when the barometer drops?" "Only when it rains sideways." He grunted. Approval, maybe. We ate at the same oak table, same crack in the leg propped by a folded hymnal. Conversation started in fits. Weather, corn prices, the neighbor's new bull. Then Mom asked about the house. "Found something," I said, sliding Grandpa's compass across the checkered cloth. The brass had warmed in my pocket all afternoon. Dad's fingers closed around it like it might vanish. "Thought I lost this in '89, he whispered. "Look inside." He flipped the lid. Etched beneath Grandpa's original inscription, "Honor steers true," was my addition. "Mercy plots the course." His eyes glistened. He cleared his throat twice before speaking. "Before you enlisted, I said the military would ruin you." "I remember." I was wrong. The words scraped out, unused to daylight. "You came back whole. More whole than any of us." After pie, we stood on the porch watching heat lightning stitch the horizon. Dad pressed the compass into my palm. "Keep it. You earned the right to navigate." Driving home, I caught their silhouettes in the doorway. 2 figures shoulder to shoulder, porch light haloing gray hair and worry. No waves, just presence. Enough. Months later, the farmhouse wore fresh white paint and a new tin roof that sang in the rain. I'd planted pecan saplings along the drive, staked tomatoes by the barn. Knox's muzzle had gone snow white, but he still insisted on morning patrol. One October evening, vehicles lined the gravel. Mom's sedan, Dad's truck, Ryan's minivan trailing a baby seat. My brother unfolded himself, casserole in hand like a white flag. "Figured you could use real food," he said, sheepish. "Also, the kids want to see the dog with 3 legs." We ate on the porch as the sun bled out across the fields. Dad raised his mason jar of sweet tea. "To blood that don't quit, even when it should." I lifted mine. "To bridges built one honest board at a time." Laughter rose, tentative, then solid. Ryan asked about night jumps. Mom wanted to know if I still wrote letters by hand. Dad listened more than he spoke, pride flickering behind his eyes like a pilot light finally catching. When they left, taillights winked out one by one. I stayed on the swing, Knox's head heavy on my knee. Stars crowded the sky, indifferent and ancient. Next morning, I spoke at the high school. Kids in hoodies and Letterman jackets filled the bleachers. The principal's introduction was kind. The silence that followed was kinder. I used to think valor meant charging the hill, I began. Turns out the steeper climb is coming home. I told them about a grandfather who taught me to sight a rifle and sight my soul. About parents who learned late that love sometimes wears combat boots. About a dog who proved loyalty isn't measured in limbs. When I finished, a girl in the front row stood first. Then the rest. No command, no cue. Just respect choosing its own posture. That night I carved my final addition into the porch rail beneath Grandpa's fading words. Strength is love that refuses to stay broken. The wind carried wood shavings across the yard like tiny white flags of surrender, not to defeat, but to peace. If you're reading this and someone's name sits heavy on your tongue, say it aloud. Dial the number. Cross the county line. Healing doesn't shout. It knocks quietly and waits. Open the door. Let the light stay on.